Okay. Have you ever, like, picked up something metal and wondered how they actually made it? I mean, it's not like metal just forms into all these crazy shapes on its own, right?
Right.
Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the world of metal casting, specifically looking at two of the most popular methods, investment casting and die casting.
Cool.
We'll be comparing them kind of side by side, so you can see how they stack up. Our source material for this deep dive is a technical comparison. It's the title's in Chinese, but it translates to investment casting and die casting, process comparison. Buckle up, because we're about to learn how those everyday objects, the metal ones at least, are actually brought to life.
Yeah, it really is pretty amazing to think that almost everything metal that we see around us, from parts of cars to jewelry to even airplane parts, they were probably made using one of these two methods.
You're absolutely right. Both investment casting and die casting, they both use molds to shape the molten metal, but that's really where the similarities end.
Mm.
So first up, we've got investment casting. And it's a really interesting process that starts by actually creating a wax model of the final metal part that you want.
Yeah, it seems kind of backwards almost at first, right? You're basically building like a temporary model out of wax in order to create a permanent mold.
Exactly. And then this wax model, you coat it in a special ceramic material, like layer after layer, until you form this solid shell. And then this is where the lost wax part comes in. The wax is actually melted away, and that leaves you with this hollow ceramic mold.
Yeah, that visual, of the wax just disappearing, it's actually a really good way to kind of solidify it in your mind.
Yeah, it's a good visual, yeah.
And it leaves behind just this like perfect cavity, ready for the metal.
Yeah, ready for the molten metal, that's right. So molten metal is poured into that ceramic shell, and then once it cools down and it solidifies, they break the ceramic away and you're left with the metal part.
Yeah.
Now, one of the really cool things about investment casting is that it allows for extremely precise parts, and they have a really smooth surface finish.
Yeah, and that smooth finish is a big deal,
Yeah.
because it means that you don't have to do as much additional processing like grinding or polishing, which can save a ton of time and money, obviously.
Yeah. And this makes investment casting perfect for really intricate parts where you need it to be super precise. Like, think about parts for a jet engine or something like that, where even a tiny little imperfection could be a huge problem.
Absolutely. When accuracy is super, super important, then investment casting is usually going to be the way to go.
Right. All right, so let's move on to die casting now. Now, unlike that kind of delicate ceramic mold we were talking about that's used in investment casting, die casting uses a really strong mold made from steel.
Yeah. That steel mold is sometimes called a die, and it's designed to withstand really high temperatures and a lot of pressure. And you can use it over and over again, which is one of the reasons that die casting is so good for mass production.
Yeah, okay. So the metal, it's heated up until it's molten, obviously, and then it's injected into the die under incredible pressure.
Mhm.
And that high pressure makes sure that the metal fills every single little detail of the mold, which results in highly detailed and complex shapes.
Yeah, that high pressure injection, that's really a key characteristic of die casting. It allows for designs that have really fine details and really thin walls, which might not be possible using other methods.
Okay, yeah. Like a metal making machine,
Yeah.
just churning out tons of identical parts super fast. Think about all those mass-produced objects that you see around you, like car door handles or, parts in your smartphone, or even like small toys, those kinds of things. Chances are a lot of those were made using die casting.
Yeah, die casting is kind of the engine behind a lot of the everyday objects that we don't even think about, really. It's fast, it's efficient, it's consistent, which makes it, like you said, perfect for making a ton of the same thing.
Right. Okay, so we've looked at each process sort of on their own. Now, I think it would be interesting to compare them kind of head to head, see how they measure up to each other.
Yeah.
So first, let's look at the mold making stage. So investment casting, remember they use that intricate wax model and then that ceramic shell. And then die casting, they're using that really strong reusable steel die.
Yeah, and that difference in the mold material is really what kind of sets the stage for how each process plays out, and it defines the strengths of each method.
Right, right. Okay, so next let's look at melting. Now, both methods, obviously they involve heating the metal until it becomes liquid, so there are some similarities there.
Yeah, definitely. They both involve melting, but it's important to point out that die casting usually works better with metals that don't have iron in them, like aluminum or zinc. But with investment casting, you can use a wider range of metals.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good point. So now let's move on to the really exciting part. This is where we pour or inject the molten metal. Now with investment casting, they use gravity. So it's just kind of gently guiding the metal into the mold. But with die casting, they're using that high pressure to force the metal into every little detail.
Right, and that difference in pressure, it has a big impact on how the final product turns out. Like we were talking about earlier, that high pressure injection that they use with die casting, it allows for much finer details and thinner walls in the part, which can be really important for certain things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So next up is cooling. So with both processes, you have to let the molten metal cool down and solidify into the shape that you want.
Yeah, and that cooling process, it's super important in determining how strong the final part is going to be, how durable it's going to be. So while both processes involve cooling, the specifics of how they do it and how fast the metal cools, it can have a big impact on how strong it is in the end.
Gotcha. Okay. And finally, let's talk about post-processing. Those extra steps that you have to do after the metal has been cast. And like we discussed earlier, investment casting, you don't need to do as much post-processing because the finish is already so smooth, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, investment casting needs less work afterwards, but there are still sometimes extra steps that need to happen, to make sure the part works how it's supposed to, or just to make it look a certain way. It really just depends on what they're going to use it for.
Okay. So I guess the big question is, which method is better?
Well, and that's where things get interesting because there really isn't a simple answer to that question. Like, it completely depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, okay. I could see that. Right. It really depends on what you need the part for, which method you're going to use. So, like, if you need something that's super precise, you need intricate shapes, and you're only making like a small number of them, then investment casting is the way to go, right?
Yeah, and if you're going for speed and efficiency and you need to make a whole bunch of the exact same part, then die casting is definitely the winner. I mean, there's a reason it's the foundation of mass production.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where things get really interesting for people who are involved in design or engineering, because when you really understand how investment casting and die casting work, all the ins and outs, it can give you a lot of new ideas for how to design
Oh,
products.
yeah, definitely. I mean, imagine you're trying to design something that needs to be really lightweight, but also super strong, and it's a complex shape. Knowing that you can use die casting to make really thin walls and intricate details, that could be the key to making that design work.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or like, imagine you need a part that has all these internal cavities or details that would be almost impossible to make using, traditional machining methods. Investment casting could be the solution there. It really opens up a lot of possibilities.
Totally. It's like having a secret weapon, when you're designing something. So let's look at some real world examples here. Our source material mentions that investment casting is great for when you're only making a small or medium number of parts. So like, imagine you're designing a piece of jewelry, a limited edition piece that has a really unique shape.
Oh, that's a perfect example. Investment casting would be perfect for that. You can capture all those little details, and it gives you that super smooth, polished finish that would really highlight the design.
Exactly. And since you're not making thousands of those pieces, it wouldn't matter so much that investment casting might be a little slower.
Right. It's all about choosing the right method for what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's flip that scenario around. Let's say you're a company that needs to make millions of car parts.
Well, then die casting would be the obvious choice,
Yeah.
right? Like we talked about, it's all about speed and volume. You can use those steel molds over and over and over again, and they're going to pump out identical parts every time.
It's crazy to think about all the complex parts that are in a car, like all the gears and levers and housings. All those are precisely engineered, and then they're made in huge quantities thanks to die casting.
It's really amazing how these two methods have had such a huge impact on the world around us. I mean, everything from tiny, intricate little components to the big industrial parts that keep everything running, investment casting and die casting have played a huge role in it all.
It's kind of like a secret language of manufacturing, and now we're starting to understand it. But it's more than just knowing how things are made. It's about using that knowledge to design new things, to be innovative.
Exactly. I think that's where the real aha moment happens. When you start to see the world through the lens of how things are made, it can change the way you think about design and problem solving and everything.
That's a good point. So next time you're holding something that's made of metal, like a doorknob or a fork or even just a simple bolt, just think about how it was made. Was it investment casting? Was it die casting?
And why do you think that chose that method? How did the way it was made affect the shape and the feel and how it works?
It's like a little mental puzzle. And it can help you appreciate those everyday things that we usually just take for granted.
And who knows, maybe it'll even give you an idea for an awesome new invention, something that takes advantage of what investment casting and die casting can do.
Okay, before we finish up this deep dive, there's one more thing we should talk about. Our source material mentions post-processing. Those are the things that are done to a part after it's been
Oh
cast.
yeah, good point. And this is where you can really see how the two methods are different. So remember how we said that investment casting makes parts with that really smooth finish?
Right, so you don't have to do as much grinding and polishing, which saves time and money.
Exactly. But even with that smooth finish, sometimes there are still some extra steps that need to be done. Like maybe they need to add a special coating to make it resistant to corrosion or to make it more wear resistant.
Yeah, or maybe they need to add some decorative elements or engravings. And investment casting is a good foundation for those kinds of things because you're starting with a really high quality, precise part.
That's right. Now, with die casting, post-processing can sometimes be a little more involved.
Okay, how so?
Well, remember that with die casting, the molten metal is injected under a lot of pressure. And while that creates all those amazing details, it can sometimes leave some little imperfections on the surface.
Like little rough edges or burrs where
Yeah.
the metal flowed into the mold.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes die-cast parts need some extra work, like trimming or grinding or polishing, just to make them smooth.
And our source material mentions that powder coating is a common thing that's done to die-cast parts.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Because powder coating adds a really durable, protective layer. And you can get it in a bunch of different colors and finishes.
Like those car door handles we talked about before.
Yeah.
So die casting lets you make those complex shapes, and then powder coating gives them that nice, smooth, durable finish.
Yeah, it's a good combination. They work well together. And this brings up an important point. Understanding what you can do with post-processing is just as important as understanding the casting methods themselves.
It's all part of the bigger picture.
Hmm.
Knowing how to enhance and refine the parts after they've been cast, it gives you even more options for creativity.
You can make the final product look and work exactly how you want it to.
So as you can see, the world of metal casting is pretty fascinating. It's a mix of science and engineering and art. We've covered a lot today, but
We've only just scratched the surface.
right, there's a ton more to learn, about all the details and special techniques and different ways that these methods are used.
And that's what makes learning fun, right? It's a journey. There's always something new to discover.
So we hope this deep dive has gotten you curious about metal casting.
And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to make something amazing yourself. Something that uses investment casting or die casting in a cool new way.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm.
And here's a challenge for you. Next time you're out and about, try to find some examples of investment casting and die casting in the real world.
Think of it like a scavenger hunt. Look at the everyday objects around you and try to figure out how they were made.
So think about those intricate door handles that we were talking about, or like the sleek aluminum frame of your smartphone, or even like the parts on your bicycle.
Yeah, every single one of those, there's this whole story of how it was made, right? And now you've got the knowledge to figure those stories out.
Yeah, you might even start noticing, the little differences in the surface finishes, or how they did the post-processing, all those little details.
It's actually kind of fun. It's like a new way to look at the things around you and appreciate how they were made.
It is. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the how of investment casting and die casting, like all the technical steps. But I think it's also important to think about the why. Why are these methods so important?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, think about how much these casting techniques have helped us innovate and make progress.
Yeah, like they've let us make parts that are way lighter and stronger and more complex than we ever could before. It's really pushed the boundaries of what's possible in engineering and design.
Absolutely. I mean, think about all the different industries where these are used. Aerospace, medical devices, cars, electronics, you name it, investment casting and die casting, they've had a huge impact on shaping the world around us.
And as those technologies keep getting better, who knows what we'll be able to make in the future, right?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to think about.
So keep your eyes open. Keep being curious. Never stop exploring, right?
Definitely. The world of metal casting, just like everything else, is constantly changing. There are always new things to discover.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into metal casting. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. And hey, maybe you'll even be inspired to go out and make something awesome yourself using what we talked about today.
That would be great. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.